we're back with the man himself, Chris Cookie Hoff, front of house engineer for STYX, who just can't help but give away gold nugget after gold nugget of information. So if you want to see the thought process behind switching a console, switching a DAW, what the channel processing looks like from a channel to channel basis, buckle up. This one is for you guys, the nerds, just like me.
I need to know what layover that is. That looks really good.
I switched over to Reaper when I put the Mac Mini in and when I got the console. Trax Live, which hasn't been supported in 7 years, it was only running like maybe 5 frames per second on the meters. So I made the switch to Reaper. Everybody's using Reaper. But my thoughts on it is, the good thing about Reaper is it's open source and it's highly customizable. The bad part about Reaper is it's open source and it's highly customizable.
Yeah.
I went through a whole bunch of templates, themes, to find something that worked for me. Then I ended up on default 6 and that looked. Everybody would say, what? Yeah, my Reaper doesn't look like yours. I know. But then when he had his console guy out here, he said, hey, there's this, something about J&T, so Google that. Strips out a lot of stuff. It makes it much more useful for us on console. We just really want a tape machine is really all we're trying to do. We're not doing editing. So they added some action buttons, some macros essentially up in the upper left hand.
Mm-hmm.
It's super stable. I mean, I'm changing the UI and it's not crashing, you know. Try to do that on another DAW.
No.
Definitely won't speak of.
I cannot get over how bright the monitors look on
Nice
this thing.
screens, and the black is black, even
Yes.
in light like this. One thing I wanted to point out with that is, you hear how exaggerated those effects are, like all the doublers and stuff. There's no way you would mix it that heavy for an album. But out here, there's so much noise that you got to get to that point where, okay, now I'm hearing it, because you want it to be there, but when you listen in cans or on headphones, you're like, oh, wow, that's really, really wet. It's just a different thing that people need to get used to when they analyze their console, listen to their mix recordings.
Well, I was listening back to a board mix of a live show I just did a couple weeks ago, and I was like appalled it was so wet, but I was like, in the room, it doesn't feel like that. Like, you have to add atmosphere to everything in such a way, it's like, it's absurd when you're just listening, but in the room it feels right.
It's a whole different mindset. There's a lot of mindsets that we talk about. You're doing it because you want it to be heard to a point. I mean, album, you want to have it so it does something, but you don't necessarily notice it, right? Reverbs, things like that. Here, you're trying to get an effect out of it. Sometimes when you do that, it's to get it to poke through all the mumble jumble going on. It's actually a lot. But the doublers and things like that, because there's so many reflections everywhere, and I'm trying to locate the vocal from here and all of its characteristics from here, not in the room, get it singing along, all that stuff. Trying to make that sound come from there. But yeah. Steam back. Wow, maybe that's too much. But no, it works in the room.
With the new console, moving from the 3.3, what was the one before this?
SD12.
SD12. So are you leaning less and less on waves to go on board here?
I am. So what I'm actually doing is now taking dynamics and things like that off of waves and moving waves to more doublers, like the real ADT. Processing chain for the stereo bus is still done there. Drum reverbs, I moved to there because now I have a better choice. I was running the Abbey Roads chamber for a while, and then a few weeks ago I switched back to the plates. It used to be internal on here, but since I'm taking less processing off of the server, I'm like, okay, now I'll start putting the intensive process, things, process. Resource intensive plugins on the server. If I have an issue, if it crashes or overheats or something like that, I can still flip back to the console stuff. I'm not really losing. When you lose the dynamics and stuff, then you really have to really compensate and make sure you're set to switch in and out. That macros are still there. With the mustard processing, which you have the standard SD processing, you've got the EQ and the two compressors that get stacked. Can be a multiband. One of them can be a multiband, can be a de-esser. That one's just a straight compressor. And then you have the gate. You can take the mustard processing, which is another EQ, another compressor with different flavors, and the gate, and you can move it in front of everything in between that SD EQ and the dynamics, or you can move it after all that stuff, or you can have it post fader. So now with more power in the chipset, you can actually move these things around in the chain, or not use them at all, which is good.
Real quick, if you guys would like to help support the channel, head on over to recordingstudioloser.com, check out some new samples. I have the Propaganda kit, a new metal kit. It's really aggressive, really in your face. I used it on my 441 video, recorded here in this room, all the room mics around here. I think it's tasty. If you want to use it on your tracks, head to recordingstudioloser.com, look for the Propaganda kit. I'll put a link down in the description. Thanks, guys.
My vocal chain was the PSC, Waves PSC, which is was it the 50, is it 5046? I don't remember the number.
I know the model number is on there. So.
The vocal noise gate, essentially.
Yep.
It was that into a C6, which eventually I moved to an F6, and then into the Quid Child because I wanted some more saturation, right? That's what we were talking about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Since then, we were on SM58s, going back old school, stepping back in time. We moved to Mic Tech PM9s, which have a transformer in them, which add more saturation. So immediately I had to back out of my Pug Childs because I was hitting them too hard. Yeah. And I was also running Digitubes on the channels, which adds some saturation. So I had to back off all that stuff because it was too much, just too much aggression.
Those Mic Techs are cool too.
They're cool. Yeah, they really like them. I mean, putting a bunch of condensers on stage is always problematic. You know, live out here when we're out in the elements.
Didn't the drummer switch cymbals as well?
He switched cymbals.
Is he running like something brighter on stage?
It's something brighter. So I think he's got his prototypes for his cymbal line. It's more splash. What these guys are saying, you're asking me what I thought. They said, we think they're more explosive, and I see what they're saying by explosive. The hit is explosive. It's more psh, then they drop out.
Yeah. Is that causing problems with condensers on stage?
It would cause problems with condensers, yeah. Yeah, because condensers going to pick up every little subtle movement, and sometimes it's better not to have the full frequency range. Sometimes you want to high and low pass your vocals in a live situation, which seems absurd in the studio. In the studio, you just back away from it, and there's your low pass. Right. Here, when everything's close mic, it's a whole different game. It's very unnatural. Things like soothe, right? Mm-hmm. You can use it on a few things. You can't use it on everything. Yeah. But when I do live mix downs, I put on a vocal or audience mic. It really starts to cover out some of that resonances that are maybe in the capsule or in the microphone or in their voice where you get too close to hear them and it's really exaggerated. Works really well for that. So think about all those things that we don't really want into the source, but are there because of our close mic situation. Yeah. And the pattern of the microphone, right? The proximity effect as you have directional microphones.
What are those Mic Techs? What is the...
Those are cardioid. I've got a couple PM9. I need to put them back up. No, PM9s are super cardioids. Okay. Yeah, so a little tighter. They have a lobe at the back, but we don't have wedges, so we're okay. Better top end than SM58. Gain was approximate same, so that was good.
So are you low passing more aggressively with those then?
It depends on the vocalist.
Okay.
Right, because they all have different characteristics in their vocal. Downstage left, Tommy's got a real husky voice, like we talked about a couple of years ago. A lot of 200. Let me back step for a second here. You got mustard processing, but then you also have the spice rack, which is they call it Naga 6 and Chili 6, which is essentially C6 and F6, right?
Oh, that's fantastic.
So once again, I can move more off of waves. Yep. And if I do have an issue, it's not as big of a jump because it's on the desk. Mm-hmm. But you see how aggressive that stuff is. That's one thing that people need, like young engineers, to see that and go, oh, that's a vocal EQ for live. Just kind of get comfortable with the way things look, because that is what you're doing. And then also in there, there's his top, his S's and things like that. That's going to get pulled down. This is basically a C6.
Gosh, that is...
Looks like it, the functions, all that stuff. But take off all that low end. I mean, he's high pass on the channel. Plus, there's a band going on here. This takes out all of his woolliness in his vocal. This one here is going to kind of stay, is not going to move quite as much because I need that to poke through. Yep. And with him being so dark in his vocal, there's more saturation on him than anybody else to get it to push through the mix. So when Evan goes through the line check, he'll do, Terry's vocal, Lawrence's vocal, Will, JY, who gets to Tommy, and it's suddenly like, whoa, what happens? It's really weird to hear one voice bounce through them all. They're like, sounds right, sounds a little darker. Well, what happened to that microphone? But you get the guy on there. I remember hearing a line check for Tom Petty years ago with Scoville, and the monitor guy came out to Tom's mic, and I'm like, whoa. It's the same situation I run into with Tommy. A husky voice like that, and you take out all that low end, you add some edge to it to get it to push through. Otherwise, it sits back too much. It's a mono doubler down the center of the lead vocal. There's that stereo doubler. Should be dry. Yeah, it's a lot. But all that 70s double track vocal stuff.
That's the interesting part too, and I know we've talked about that before, like mixing to an era.
Yeah.
And especially with somebody that has a career this long.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out which era or how to change from era to era.
And where do we land and how far do we take?
And I guess there's no right answer. It's just
no right answer. Hit the major things and let it go. Like that drum kit is what I mean, I'll listen back to the 70s stuff where where the vocals are kind of darker and they're pushed back. And that's the thing. Can't do that here because these guys want to hear the vocals, so I gotta push the vocal forward. Okay, but then if I push the vocal forward, then it's just vocals. And it's a rock band. You still want to hear the energy, so now I gotta put the drums out there. So what can I do? Well, I can do the doublers. I can do the effects. It's like I said a couple years ago. It's caricature of a mix. Things are exaggerated.
You gotta get that on a T-shirt. Caricature
mix. Gary the Wiser.
While we're here on the board, we talk about like individual channels and kind of the mindset you're going through with that.
Kick drum and bass guitar, right? Mm-hmm. So I have basically a 60 hertz kick drum. I would think of it that way. That's where the body of it is. Yep. It's not an EDM kick. It's not doing 30 hertz. It's not doing 40 hertz. It sounds really weird for you to have a classic rock band have that really, really big bottom end on the kick drum. And this is something that contrasts me with Brian, with Foreigner. I've got a 60 hertz kick drum and he plays a lot, so I got to kind of keep it tight and punchy. 60 hertz is carved out in the bass guitar, but then bass guitar gets, all that
carrying the low end,
all that low end on it. So there's also all those videos that people talk about, clean low end and controlling it. Yeah, absolutely. When you have all these 18s and all this power and a room that you're just going to get energized in there. So really got to say, okay, this instrument gets this frequency range. This instrument's going to carve out and do this, and that's how you kind of keep it all together. Because the old adage, mid-range is the hardest thing to get right in the studio. Low is the hardest thing to get right in live, and it's absolutely true. Everything else, you can kind of push it through, and it's going to come out. But your low end is going to get energized in the room. It's going to cause problems. One thing I do is with bass guitar is I've got a DI. It's a tube DI, and then I've got the Palmer. So it's a Demeter tube DI. Then it's the Ampeg. It's the 100 watt tube head. It's the lower wattage one that goes into a Palmer PDI 03, just like the guitar players are doing.
Yep.
So I'm looking for the mid-range out of there and kind of some more saturation. The DI is cleaner, more heavily compressed, and that's the one that does the low end mostly. So essentially that's what's going on with the DI.
So is that at 500? Like ish, that dip right there you've got?
Is that? Yeah, 530.
I always pull that out too.
Yeah.
It's just a weird frequency.
And if you listen to Ampegs, like the SVTs and things like that, they kind of naturally do that.
Yeah.
So there's his low end that's doing it. There's the kind of articulation on the strings, but heavily compressed. Now we could contrast that to the bass amp, which is really just through the Palmer.
So that's carrying kind of your gritty top end, the stuff that's going to cut through the mix, and the DI is your controllable low end.
Yeah.
Cleaner all the way out.
And then what this input actually does, they both go to two groups here. There's a bass, and I call it bass beef. Right. It started out as bass beef. Really, it's bass mid-range, articulation. So there's a low shelf on the bass beef, or on the bass. On the bass beef, it depends on the room. So my channel strips will stay the same. If I need to get a little bit more articulation, I'll grab it there, or I'll grab it here. But the thing is, if I grab it here, if I push that bass amp a little bit more, I'm sending to the guitar group along with all the guitars. That guitar group sends to a doubler. So there's the chorus on the bass. It's the same chorus as all the guitars are going to. So all those guys kind of get the same thing. And that thing just rides along in the background. It's just always there. Anytime I send anything to the guitar group, it's going to also go to that doubler, which is kind of subtle. So that's the chorus. But of course, you keep the low end clean so that your tuning is right. And that's the harmonic and all that stuff. Same thing.
And this may be more of a question for guitars.
Yeah.
But one of the things I was curious about, like hearing you talk about all the things that happen here and all the things that do happen on stage and the changes that happen on stage.
Yeah.
How much of you, do you ever consider, or does it even come into a thought in your head, like that guitar, I need to do this to that guitar, like that one's bright, I'm going to cut it. Or do you kind of have a general stance that you're going to take with guitars and then let them you work that palette on their own?
They work the palette because they're compensating for what guitar is happening. If the player makes a mistake, forgets something, maybe they're on the wrong pickup to start with, they're gonna fix that. There's so much going on here. I don't have time to grab EQs and all that stuff. I'm writing the levels because yes, there's guitar solo, but there's a supporting instrument as well that's giving this the harmonic structure behind. So I got to make sure that sits, and that stuff changes. Like maybe, for instance, Grand Illusion during Tommy's solo, Will on guitar is the harmonic background, right? And the keys are down. When it goes to JY, Will comes down. Now it's the keyboards that are supporting him behind his solo. It's those different color changes that happen. So to have to grab EQs as well, like it's come on.
So you're working like a general like zoomed out picture and then mixed principles and then letting stuff there make the little micro changes that it needs to do. I mean, that's kind of the same approach that I feel like I want to have in the studio too. Like I don't want to force something into a box that it's not meant to be in. And really, they're the professionals. So I want to stay out of their way, but I'm going to fix a problem if I have to.
Yeah.
So
there's all the old school famous engineers that talk about in the old days we used to capture performances. Now, engineers are creating performances. And I don't want to, do that. I just want to make changes for the audience, change the palettes for it, but they're doing the performance, I mean, I did that one video where, editing with faders.
Yeah.
I'll do stuff like that to kind of keep it clean because maybe they're shifting or maybe they're on a high gain setting and they're moving around or they have to grab a towel and wipe their face. And I need the presentation to be clean without them having to deal with all of that. That's fine. But it's still their performance.
Right.
Still all of our performance, really.
Can we look at guitars real quick and just kind of out of curiosity see what you're doing? Top and tail. It looks very reminiscent of.
Yeah, nothing major going on. It's the problem I have with the Palm, not really a problem. One of the things that you'll notice with Palmers is there's a lot of top end that comes out of them, which speakers aren't doing. So I just kind of shave them down a little bit. So you notice he got a little bit of edge going, and his rig is starting to migrate a little bit towards bright. So I'm gonna start pulling that little bump I had in there down. Who is this? This is Tommy's electric. I just kind of cut off the ends.
Yep.
Scotty is doing changes with that EQ pedal and all that stuff, so I let that go. I don't want to get too heavy into that one. Will acoustic, so I gotta pull that, wrapping this stuff out. Will guitar. He is really transient heavy. Like when I put him up against Tommy's rig, and I have him spread stereo wise, he's very tight and articulate, and his rig is really transient compared to what Tommy's rig is. So even though they're at the same level on the meter, I kind of have to dip him down because sonically it sounds, because he's poking through more. So there's times I had spoken before where maybe I'm not on center or maybe in the back of the room and I can't quite hear the PA and I'm mixing like a wide stereo thing and I'm looking at my guitar crush, which is going to show me my balance between my left and right on my guitars. And I'm mixing there and then making sure that that's close to it and then wherever the guitars are. And then listening to it, thinking, okay, does he sound louder than Tommy, and then trying to mix it sonically? But that gets me close in level wise. One of the things I try to do with Will is kind of give him a little bit more body, take away some of that top end in there, so his transients aren't so spiky. He's not doing leads; he's just doing rhythm stuff.
And it's not much.
Not much.
I mean, just generally pushing things in directions.
But he also, let's see if I can pull this up. He also goes to an ADT because he's covering a lot of rhythm stuff. He sends to a doubler. That ADT adds a little bit of brightness to him. So if he's going to that insert, some songs he's not. I have a Q1 at the tail end of that just to kind of pull some of that 4K out of that the ADT's adding.
I'm interested to see how you answer this question because how I approach when I do it, and I'm not nearly the front of house person you are.
That's the only thing I do.
Once everything's finished and the show's happening and you've gone through all the sound check stuff, you fixed all the problems, now we're in a show. You're creating something for everybody around you.
Yeah.
Do you view this as an instrument?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's my general mindset too. Like they're putting on a show, but just as much like they're playing instruments and creating something on stage, like I view this as an instrument, and you're playing right along with them. You may as well be part of the band.
Yeah.
Where this is easy to think about like a technical thing, but there's a highly artistic piece to this that's harder to speak to. But
as a musician, there's all that technical stuff that you need to go through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes about muscle memory. So it's the same situation. Mm-hmm. Here it's all the technical stuff, we get that handled. And then when we get to the show, it's like, okay, we've already handled that. Here it is. Now here's the performance of it. You know what I mean? So it's all the same.
Can we see what's going on with keys?
Nothing.
I assumed as much.
Yeah, nothing. You go to this one where they're spilled out.
These are things people were asking the whole time, and in my mind, I'm like, it's probably not much.
Not much. So it's just a high pass on there.
Yep.
On the piano, which also does the organ stuff.
Just keeping that clean low end.
Keeping it clean. I have them at 80 hertz. I cross over the subs at 60. Synth.
Yep.
Kind of cut out a little bit of the 62 on a dynamic EQ. So if it starts to be too much time on my hands.
Yeah.
That one, because he's doing that bass line. I want to kind of keep that still carved out for the kick drum. Rest of the synth sounds aren't that low end heavy. They're kind of up, so that's why it's a dynamic EQ. But when he's hitting that low end heavy, I want it to kind of tuck out of the way and do all that stuff. The other thing I am doing is doing a crush group for them. So I got keys and key crush. So things like Lady, where it comes in on a nice delicate piano intro, the key group is up, but the key crush is pulled back. I don't want that piano to be Lady. I don't want that. I want it to be a nice little thing, and that's easy to do just on a fader move. Just
on your crushes, are all of your crushes kind of treated the same way in what you're doing, or the same ideology?
Same ideology, yeah. This one's hitting pretty hard. Organ going through there right now, but you see it's kind of riding even with the key group. Mm-hmm. But you see how I'm hitting it pretty hard.
Yeah, like minus 6-ish.
Yeah, and there's two comps stacked up.
Okay. 3.5-ish and then a 10. So you're kind of doing like 1176 slower attack-ish and then kind of like an opto type of thing?
Yep.
Okay.
I have the band pulled down on the 1176 essentially, the faster one.
Now is that adding width? What is the width number?
It's the key detection.
Oh, okay.
So on the bass one, along with the muster processing and the different flavors of compressors, I opted for the optical style on the bass beef. I think that's why I called it beef initially. I was heavily compressing it. Right now, he's not really getting into it very, very much on that.
Yeah.
But you do have the type where you can change, the classic one, which is the SD one, vintage VCA style, opto, or FET.
Which flavor are you using on like your kick? Just out of curiosity.
I'm using the standard SD one, which is feed forward, I think is what it is.
Okay. So
API style.
Yeah, like a 2500-ish style thing.
It's kick and snare both go in there to kind of keep them leveled out.
So it's parallel compression, heading on out.
Just
to kind of keep things as controlled as possible.
The only real group-to-group thing I do is I send the snare top and bottom to a snare group, then that gets affected.
Mm-hmm.
None of that is on. We've got the tube on, so it's got some saturation going. A little bit of EQ on the SD side, so I'm not really actually doing a whole lot to it once they get some together, and on harmonics to it. I'm trying to clip it a little bit, right? So 2 channels go to that snare, and now that snare group, that acts as the snare channel. That sends to the dry drums and also sends to the kick snare crush. So people will say, well, your latency. I don't really hear it because it's adding, less than a millisecond probably. I haven't measured it by sending it to the group, but the snare mics are here, overhead mics are here. So all I'm doing is, delaying them back.
Right.
Is it perfectly in time? Are you kidding me? How much stuff is close mic'd up there? No. If I could just do room mics for drums, I'd be in heaven right there. And in a room being the key, drums in a different room. But can't do that. So tons of compromises out here on that.
Now, I know phase is definitely important.
Mm-hmm.
How much of a stickler are you with polarity, or do you really?
You have to, yeah. Otherwise your low end's going.
You want to make sure everything's positive, or does that matter to you as long as it's the same?
If they're working together, yeah. So I mean, if the vocal mics were technically, and this is something I thought about the other night, maybe I should reverse the polarity of my vocal mics, and they're out of but there's physical distance. So what cycle are you on? You can't quite do it. I thought about flipping my vocal mics to see if I can get rid of some of the cymbal bleed, right? But you're physically so far from them.
Yeah.
Whatever. But anytime two things are working together, yeah, you have to, kick in and kick out. Bass DI, Palmer. Actually, the Palmer needs a little bit of, the DI needs a little bit of delay to it, I think. Let me look and see what that was. The Palmer needed a little bit of delay to it. So the DI is coming out, and I don't know why. DI is coming out XLR. The Palmer is being fed through the quarter-inch out, and that was faster. It was 120 microseconds. I don't know.
Whatever works.
Whatever works. But you got time at home, and you look at the waveform, in your DAW and go, wait a minute, 120. Okay.
Question, just out of my own curiosity. I'm anal when it comes to polarity, especially in the studio, because so many things are controllable.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see a positive polarity because that's going to push air towards me. From the listener's standpoint and to the speakers. Do you care about that here? Because I've tried to recreate that live, and I'm like, I don't know if this is actually doing anything. There's so many possible variables here, but I don't know if that part of my thinking is...
I started working at a company years ago, and they were all pin 3 hot. Because they just said, okay, we're going to do everything pin 3 hot, and that was before the convention of pin 2 became standard. A lot of the manufacturers that they were using, BSS, JBL even at the time, were all pin 3. That was before the audio industry as a group decided, hey, we're all going to go pin 2. So all their wiring was pin 3. It only mattered when you went from XLR to quarter-inch. That's all that mattered, really. And talking to the owner, I said, does it matter pin 2 or pin 3? He goes, you're either pushing or pulling. As long as everybody's working together, who cares? No, we tend to be using things that are all pin 2 hot anyway these days. So there's that. PA wise, yeah. When we're lining up zones and things like that, yes, we need to do that. Sometimes with subs, whenever you break the subs away from the main array, sometimes you need to reverse the polarity on them. Then you still need to make sure you're on the same cycle. You could be a cycle ahead or behind. So you also have to look at the time and go, does this make sense? Like those V25 boxes have, I think what Raul told me the other day was about 7 milliseconds of latency just through the processing. So we're adding anywhere from 3 to 4 milliseconds, sometimes maybe 5 milliseconds to them to push them back to the subs, which are physically 8 feet behind. So you look at the math, you're like, yeah, that's about right. That's about right. But we're also averaging the phase response through several mics in the room. So when we're down in front of it, it's one time. As you move back, it may be a different time. So we're looking at through the software and saying, okay, what's the average phase response here? And that's what we're trying to line up. It's only perfect in one spot. Yes, there's the polarity thing, but also what is your time? And for us out here, the timing is a huge deal, and polarity in the loudspeaker system. In what's coming through the mix, where it's all close mic, things are, you're getting bleed from something over here.
Right.
How are you going to do this? You'd like to imagine that it makes a difference. You want that speaker to push against you, but I don't know.
In the studio, I'm anal about it, but live, I don't know. Like I pull up Reaper and I'll check my drums.
Yeah.
Obviously, so just double check things right phase and time align just makes it easier when I have no time to do it. But I've gotten into such a habit of I want to see it positive, so it's pushing air towards me. I don't know if it makes a difference in a situation like this at all. There's so many things happening here.
Speakers pushing at you. If we're in stores, the wall will be pushing at you.
Yeah.
The ceiling's pushing at you. But also when a kick drum hit, you're going to see a little wave, and then you're going to see the big wave. So it all comes down to, do you still feel it? What does it sound like?
Right.
But then I'll say that, and then I'll completely reverse the entire, like on my sends to the PA. I'll invert the polarity. I can't really tell, which then effectively moved all my positive inputs to negative, right?
There's so many little things to overthink when it's like we're trying to get that much better, or what we think could be better.
Yeah.
It's like, does it really matter? Does the band still sound good?
Does that dude with his Budweiser to his mouth and go, oh man, that hit them in the face.
Whatever he just did.
Bro! No, they're drinking beer, they don't care. The only time you really hear is when you go back and want cans, you listen to it, you analyze it, but I just try to keep it as whenever two things are doing the same job, same instrument, working together, obviously they need to be in time. So I've got snare bottom reversed, I've got the ride under the underride reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else is positive up there. My kick outs are reversed because the cycle, I've got the inside mic and the outside mic. And looking at that, you can see it in the DAW. When you pull the tracks away, you can see the wave actually start. So I don't know if those mics are, maybe it's just a position, maybe it's a reflection in the drum where how it's getting to it. That initial wave is opposite. So my kick out mics are reversed.
Yep.
But again, they're doing the same instrument with another microphone. So yeah, you work together.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you like it, hit the like button, subscribe for more. If you want to see how they set up a system, what happens before we even got talking about channels, go click this video down here. You're gonna love it, I promise. Otherwise, I'll give you your money back. Did you pay anything? You didn't pay? You didn't pay?